Hi, and welcome to our latest Analytica LinkedIn Live. I'm Ashley Zeckman, the VP of Strategy and Customer Success at Analytica. In today's broadcast, is part of a series that we're running to shine a light on industry experts changing their fields. And this one in particular is very exciting to me as we're highlighting women in technology as part of Women's History Month, which we're just closing out. So just as an FYI, we were planning on having 3 experts on the call today, but unfortunately, Maureen had a family emergency and is unable to join us. We wish her the best and can't wait to feature her in an upcoming LinkedIn Live very shortly. But I am joined by 2 phenomenal women in tech today, both who have great, amazing stories to tell. And I'd love to kick us off by just having them introduce themselves. So Kathleen, do you want to go ahead and share a little bit about you and your background?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Kathleen Delaney, and I am the CMO of Kofax. I'm responsible for global marketing functions that include product marketing, demand gen, digital marketing, our corporate comms team, marketing ops, events, and analyst relations, and I'm sure there's something I've forgotten there. I've held several executive marketing roles, major corporations in the financial and risk management sectors, and I've just got the school credentials as well. I've got an MBA in finance and international business from NYU, but I'm thrilled to be here. So thanks for having us today.
Of course. Thanks for joining. We also have Theo Lau on the phone. Theo, do you mind sharing just a little bit about you and your background?
Sure. Hi. Thank you so much for having me. So I'm the founder of Unconventional Ventures based in Washington, D.C. And recently, we also published a book called Beyond Good that talks about how corporations, large and small, around the world can create better business models and more inclusive products and service offerings and respond to a lot of the megatrends that's going on around the world. And it is a strong belief of mine and all is that profits and purpose can and should coexist. A little bit before that, so I am, technically speaking, in the fintech ecosystem. It's been for a while now. My background was engineering, so did all the whole 9 yards of school in engineering school, and loads of fun. Spent the most time in telco. Make a long story short, here I am. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining. And I see it looks like you have a copy of your book behind you. I'm assuming everyone can buy it on Amazon. Let's get it to the bestseller list, right? Oh,
there we
Kathleen
go.
has one right in front of her.
All right, there.
I feel like I should be fired.
Oh, no.
I feel like I should be fired as the host. I didn't have one. We didn't coordinate our books today.
We'll need to fix that. Yes, but Kathleen, let me know if you like it, and we would love.
Oh, it was wonderful. It was wonderful. Actually, I thought gleaned some really information for our conversation today from it. So I'm gonna. There's one anecdote that I really want to call out. So looking forward to it.
Perfect.
I love that. We're all getting along so well already. So I want to spend most of today just learning a little bit more about the 2 of you, some of the experiences that you've had in the world of tech. But before we start, Theo, last week you had tagged me on LinkedIn with a new report that came out. It was the Gender Pay Gap Report by PayScale. And I just wanted to call out a few things that I thought were interesting about it. So in this report, they cover all sorts of different industries. And I think on average, it's about women's pay is about 86 cents to every dollar that men counterparts make, but in technology specifically, it's 90 cents is where women tend to fall. And it's not at the lowest end, but it's definitely not at the highest end either, right? It falls more towards the lower side of that pay gap. And then also notice that that pay gap is wider for women of color, women at higher job levels, and women in certain occupations such as finance, right? So this is a very real thing that I think you had mentioned in your post. Things are moving, but at a glacial pace, right? They aren't moving fast enough.
Yeah, it feels like we're taking 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. And it hurts. The data shows, especially in financial services, I think it was one of the worst. We surely do have a lot of women, but mostly they're in, the starting positions, right? The lower income group. And as we go up the ladder, if you will, it just becomes more and more less diverse, let's put it this way. And another thing I wanted to call out with that particular report is also the gap that gets wider as women get older. So how much men do get paid stays pretty much the same as they get older. But for women, it drastically drops. And I think that's another challenge that we face, especially since we're all living longer, right? And we are working longer. And so when you start adding everything up from motherhood penalty, which I personally experienced, it was quite awful, to having to take time away for caregiving, taking care of not just your children but also your parents, and it just adds up. And then we start thinking about, wait a minute, what about retirement security, right? And it compounds. So lots of opportunities to improve.
Absolutely. And I think that's an important kind of catalyst for the conversation we're having today, are those real experiences that women have in the workplace, in technology in particular. And I think, again, today I want to take a look at kind of an unfiltered look at your stories, your careers, and sort of what you think the outlook or the future for women in tech might be. So I think to kick us off, I because I know you both have very interesting backgrounds, and I just kind of love to know, have you always wanted to work in technology, or did you maybe start down a different path initially? And Kathleen, I don't know if you want to go first.
Sure. So I definitely started down a different path. I started college as a French major, and all I wanted to do was be a lawyer. And my father in particular was absolutely not. You're not going to go to Gidget and be some interpreter at the UN, which is exactly what I wanted to do. And so he really pushed me towards business school, which, in that I had an affinity for math, which I found out late in college. So, that came alive. And so I ended up graduating with a degree in econometrics, which is basically applied math in the business sense. But yeah, I definitely, most of my college career was around being a lawyer. And, for me, what really got me kind of kicked, because, again, traditionally I had a math degree, but I went to my first job, I landed in health and benefits for Johnson & Johnson, which, that's kind of, that's, how can I say it? There was an easy path for me to get there. And it wasn't until I had a professor from graduate school that introduced me to some folks that I landed at Bell Labs and AT&T. And that's really the rotation that I did through AT&T's Bell Labs 100 years ago, is where I got my start in tech, fell in love with tech. And I think one of the reasons is because I had that business background, I was able to just, MBA 101, there was all this tech being developed going on, but they had nobody to do pricing or what I'll call sanity checks. It's just like, let's bring this to market and, it'll be $5 a piece. I'm like, are you kidding? Nobody's ever going to pay $5 for that. So that was when $5 worth a lot more than it is now. So, it just, from there, it snowballed and it became a real interest and passion, in terms of always learning. There's always something different, which is what still attracts me to the field today, frankly. Even though my skill set is so much in marketing and those are the muscles I've developed, my career has been about applying that in so many different industries. And I just love learning. It's just what I do. So,
right, there's some core fundamentals that are consistent across the different roles you've played. But then because technology moves so quickly, there's always something to learn.
For sure.
Right?
Yep.
What about you, Theo? Did you always want to be in tech?
Nope. So here's the funny story, right? Call it bias, call it cultural influence, if you will. Growing up as Chinese, we don't really have too many approved paths. Let's put it this way. You're either an engineer, a doctor, a lawyer, or you're in business if your family's wealthy. That's kind of like what was acceptable. Well, I like to break rules. I believe rules are made to be broken. And so when I was in high school, I'm like, I like rocks. I'm just going to go for geology. I got accepted in Bucknell. Beautiful school. Wonderful. Got my dorm and an email and everything set up. And next thing you know, I flunked my physics. It's high school, I had more important things to do. That did not go well. Background, I was, my physics teacher was my dad's student. So that was strike one. And strike two was all-girls Catholic school. That was bad. And so I got talked down by my physics teacher in front of the entire class of my friends that says, you will never, ever be an engineer because you flunked. Ouch, that was not cool. So the one thing that I think my friends have found out all along is to not ever tell Theo she can't do something. So I ended up going to RPI, did an engineering degree, engineering school, chemical engineering degree, and I got straight A's. And I went back to school and, kind of like, yeah, hey, here you go. Yep, I did it. So that was my path, was moving from rocks to mixing things up in the lab, which was fun. But I think what was important, and that's something I instill upon my kids too, is it's not so much so the degree that you pursue in higher ed or the discipline, if you will, but it's your mindset, right? Like Kathleen, like what you say, constantly be on the lookout to learn what's new, what's different. Be curious, stay curious, and be open-minded. And you know what? You can chart your own path.
Exactly.
Is it safe to assume you still like rocks, though, Theo? It's still a passion?
I do, and so does my daughter. I think it's a genetic thing. She loves to collect rocks. So yeah, but I think there's something interesting about connecting with nature, right? It's out there. It's for us to explore, and there is no designated way on how we appreciate the things around us. And if we're thinking about technology, I think that's the one thing I wanted to make sure we can keep. Doesn't matter what discipline you're in, doesn't matter if you're, what gender you're in. It's digital technology. Tech is a means to an end, is a way for us to get from one point to the other. At the end of the day, there's a human behind it, right? AI, there is a human behind AI. There are humans behind all of the programming. There are humans behind the tech that enable the three of us to sit together and talk, right?
There are humans running it in the background for us and moderating it for
Exactly.
us. Right?
Yes, absolutely.
Technology is only as good as the people that power it, right? And I think that with both of you, right, you have multiple passions, right? So you might not be a geologist, Theo, but that's still a passion, and tech is a passion for both of you, right? And so I think it's just, you can have both, right? You can have multiple passions, some of which lead to career, some of which don't. I had a passion for art. I went to art school. I'm not an artist by any means, but I love to paint, right? So it's having those things, and they feed so much into each other, right? Our multiple passions are connected in some way in the things that we do. So another question I'm really curious to know is, if you think back to, when you started your careers, or started your careers in tech specifically, since we know that everyone took kind of a roundabout way to get here, what do you think has changed for women in tech or in business since you began your career? What's changed and what has stayed the same? It's a loaded question, I know.
I think there's certainly more dialogue and more resources. Okay. Now, the results of them remain to be seen. I'd like to say there's more opportunity, but I think, Theo, what you talk about sometimes is just the role models. There's not a lot of role models. It's not still seen as the norm, where it's the norm for other, and it's not just women. I mean, there's diversity across the board. That's the issue. It's funny because we talk about unconscious bias, and it's something that's near and dear to my heart, because I'm recognizing how many I have. And it's one of those, so that's why I wrestle with what has changed, because I think at this stage of my career, there's so much I've normalized that I really learn from the observations of young women that I mentor. And I'm like, oh, I never even thunk of that. Okay. And so that's helpful for me, is stay connected to that generation so that I can impact it, given the voice and the platform that I have, if that makes any sense.
I love, 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 love your point about normalizing experience. And I catch it myself too, especially when my kids experience or they see something and they'll speak out. I remember, this is like a few years ago now. My son is 12, my daughter's 9. So this was when they were still younger. My son was reading something about how in the old days, certain culture, women, girls, they're not allowed to go to school. I think even now there are tons of restrictions in some areas in our world. And he said, oh my God, Mommy, I just read this. This is not fair. Girls should be able to do anything they want, just like us. And it struck me because A, it's how kids think, and B, is things that I didn't even think about, right? We're like, yeah, okay, that was bad, it's history, but now it's okay. But the kids are so much more vocal about what they observe and how they think the world needs to be. And I think I have hope that things will change, that they'll see some things that are not right and they will work towards changing it. The challenge that I have, though, and it's similar to your point, Kathleen, is I think there's definitely more awareness, there's more dialogue, there's more conversation, and the knowledge, acknowledgement that we need to change. But knowing that something needs to change versus actually being an ally, regardless of what gender you're in, regardless of what background you're in, to fix that. That's a different thing, because there's inertia. There is the question I always ask: what is the incentive for them to change, right? If you take a step back and look at the wealthiest people in the United States, and then you project out, look at the wealthiest people in the entire world, the top 10 of them, there are men, right? And you look at the wealth that they've been able to gather and how much that is. I think recently I read a report from Oxfam that said the 10 wealthiest men collectively, if they were to spend $1 million each day, each one of them, so collectively $10 million you spend down, it will take them over 400 years to spend everything. And then you start to think, wait a minute, how can we even close that, right? And what is the incentive for people up top to change?
Yeah, that's crazy, right? Like that feels so outside of the realm of normal life for most of us, right? And again, I love the conversations around unconscious bias and allies, right? Because an ally can be anyone, right? It's women supporting women and men supporting women, and just being, and women supporting men as well, right? Like it's very person based, not gender based, which I really appreciate. So again, I think this is a conversation that's a tough one to have, right? This is a hard question to answer. So sorry for not sorry for throwing it at you, but it's as much as things change, they stay the same, but progress is being made, right? So we're part of what we're talking about is diversity and inclusivity as well. And if we look at STEM, the STEM environment specifically, do you think what do you think are some ways that we can make it more inclusive for women, for people of color, kind of across the board? What are the things that you think need to happen in order for us to make it a more inclusive environment?
I like to just start with encouragement. There is a high school senior that I know and love dearly who is a young woman and thinks like an engineer, writes like an engineer, takes notes like an engineer. But when she considered going to degrees in engineering, she's like, "Oh, that's boring, mommy. I don't want to do that." Oops, I just gave away who it was. And it made me laugh because she's my kid. And I'm just like, "What do you mean?" And then, if Maureen was on, I started to introduce her to all these women that have these great engineering backgrounds. And it's almost like this perception that that's boring. And I'm like, why do you think that now? Is it media? And, that gets into a whole different generational, TikTok and all that kind of fun stuff that we're not going to cover here. But it's that encouragement and exposure, I think is so important. And then, I also love the concept that I've been reading more about and hearing more about is, STEAM, not just STEM. So science, technology, whatever the E is, arts and math. Okay, so adding the arts back into a STEAM or STEM program gives that creativity a different hook potentially for other students. But I just think it is constant encouragement, and that's where it needs to start, frankly.
Yeah, I think giving them the opportunity, giving people the opportunity to expose them to different things. And I remember a story that I had when my daughter was born. I took the kids to the Aerospace Museum they were little. And at the checkout counter, you know, what they always have is a gift shop because, of course, you need to buy things before you go. There was only one thing that was quote unquote for girls. It was a Hello Kitty stuffed animal with an astronaut hat. Everything else was for boys. All the books on the cover of the books, little kids' books, were boy astronauts. All the things, it was more, it almost feel like it was more attractive for guys. And my daughter, she was like looking around, she was like, well, what can I get? There was nothing for her. And I feel like, well, you know, if this is how you're starting out when they're little, this is how you're raising them, you create this unconscious model of what girls are supposed to be versus how boys are supposed to be. And I told this story before that, you know, when I was growing up, I love puzzles, I love Legos, in case you can't tell from the background. But Legos was Legos. It was Legos. My favorite set were space Legos. And then when I had my daughter, everyone kept sending pink Legos because supposedly the only acceptable gifts for little girls were Barbie dolls and pink Legos. I'm like, no, just we can and we need to normalize things. Don't start segregating them. Let them experience whatever life is out there because real life is not separated into this is what boys supposed to do, this is what girls supposed to do. You need to set them up for success. And that's the role model. That's see how you talk to them. That's what they read about. That's what they can relate to. And I am very encouraged. If you were asking Ashley earlier, what has changed is I'm seeing a lot more effort from people in different areas. Stories about, you know, fearless women, you know, stories about people that have made it, stories about the early days of computers where they were actually women, they were not machines. So all of these, I think it will help to start injecting these ideas into the next generation, hopefully, or even our current generation, that you can be what you want to be. You do not have to be bounded by what society thinks you need to be.
And it's okay for risk. If I could just riff on that a little bit, I do think, again, I really hate broad generalizations because there's always the exception to the norm, but there is a risk, there's a different risk tolerance that we raise kids with. And it is okay to make, I've made 100 mistakes. Just don't make it twice. Okay. And I learned that really early in my career. And I had managers that supported me on that. Okay, I brought down AT&T's entire computer processing over the weekend. Okay, like horrible JCL at that point. Literally, my phone's blowing. Anyway, but it was. I just think there's a different risk tolerance, and right or wrong. And like I said, I hate generalizations, but I do think in the norm, men are more comfortable with risk than women tend to be. Okay, and letting folks know it's okay to take a risk, to take a job you're not comfortable with. You know, you will figure it out. Having that confidence is something as not just mentors but managers that we need to do. I think there's the Deloitte report that constantly says that men are promoted on potential and women on experience. And so just really being able to turn that around so that you're looking at the continuum, you know, on the same level playing field, if you will.
I love that. Excuse me, because I would venture to say that there have been points in all of our careers where the position we had didn't exist before we carved it out, right? Like it's about kind of identifying that opportunity and being okay with some gray areas and being okay with building something. And you know, I think that's really important, right? Is to go for it, being okay with failing. Like mistakes happen, it's inevitable, right? We are humans, not machines, so we are going to make mistakes, but it's what we do with those and what we learn from it and how we do it differently next time that I think is the most important part of that. I also love too that, and I wrote it down, the idea of STEAM instead of STEM, because I think there is such an art to technology, right? In terms of everything from, you know, creating a user interface that people, you know, want to use and enjoy to use, and complex like problem solving, right? Is a part of that is the art, and you know, it's that mix of art and science. So I love that call out That's what I'm going to call it from now on, Kathleen. You've converted me. Um, one other thing that comes top of mind to me is my friend Kathy McPhillips, who used to be VP of Marketing at Content Marketing Institute, now has a new position, and she started a series this week where she's featuring what did she say, young adults, and helping them is part of what she wants to do. So she's been highlighting young talent on her LinkedIn page every day. It's a new person every day. She talks a little bit about their background, what she appreciates about them. And I think it's just as much about helping each other at the points we are in our career, but also that younger generation too, right? So that was something that I noticed just this week that I thought was a really cool way to go about kind of mentorship and giving those people exposure to people they might not otherwise get to meet.
I love that. I think that's a large part of what I truly believe in is if we are fortunate enough to have a platform, we need to use it to highlight voices that people otherwise don't hear, right? And that's part of our podcast. Is every week we try to bring in different people from different places of the world, startup entrepreneurs, people who are doing amazing things. They're doing the hard work. It's, I would say, our job, part of it is to bring that story to the rest of the people so they can get, they're highlighted. And I think that's one of the part about, we talk a lot about the fintech ecosystem and where a lot of the funding goes into the same three cities, right? San Francisco, New York, and Boston. And where most of the funding, overwhelmingly, over I think 97%, 98%, do not go into female-only founders. It's because of that. It's not because there are not female fintech founders. It's not because they're not doing amazing things. It's because they do not have access to that big network of people who can help them get exposure. So I love what your friend is doing, Ashley, and I think we need more storytellers.
Well, in addition to using your platform to shine a light on others, what do you think can be done to create just more opportunities for women within the workplace? So again, kind of using your social platform to lift up other voices is one option. Again, finding other ways to shine a light on them. But what do you think that we can change structurally within the workplace to give more opportunity?
So, one of the things that I push, again, not just at Kofax, but with any of my peers, especially now with the Great Resignation, it's diverse slates, okay? Because you'll go to recruiters have their network and they put the people. So you have to push back. And again, this is diversity across the board, okay? Not just women. It's bringing every underrepresented group into the place. Because if you're going to tell me there's not Latinas that can have a senior sales role, I'm going to tell you you're crazy. Okay. It's just a function of finding them. And so where, from, you say systematically. So at a corporate level, when we've got roles that are open and across the board, but I think significantly as you get more senior, let's just call it director and above, really making sure that you've got a diverse slate of candidates and you're not just going with the first three or the easy ones that come over the board from the network. And I know that's hard. I know it's hard to be that person that's pushing back and that's saying, I need more, or I want to see this. And then you get pigeonholed. It would be nice that we're not having the conversation about what a historic nomination Ketanji Brown Jackson is. Okay, I can't wait till we get to a place where we don't think about that anymore, or we don't make a big deal about the first time two women what is it called? Not narrate, but host a Major League Baseball game. I think that was last year. It's like, why? It shouldn't be, but it is. And we need to recognize that and talk about how great it is. But hopefully get to a place where it's really not a big deal going forward.
I know. I agree. One of my pet peeve is she has a name. That's my pet peeve. If you look across a lot of the news articles, right? Doesn't matter which major news publication it could be. Oftentimes you see the man's name being featured on the headline. This says so-and-so is, got promoted to CEO, what have you. When it comes to women's accomplishment, it always becomes, X bank appoints a woman X, or, X corporate promoted a first Black X. No name to be found, just, a person being identified and singled out by the color of their skin, their gender, or where they're from. Why? We were born with our name. All of us, when we're in the hospital, it's the first thing we got. We have a birth certificate with our name. What happened to my name? I'm a person. I'm a person, and I want people to recognize me as a person before you say, oh, wait a minute, you're Chinese. Oh, yes, you're Chinese. So what? I am me, and I'm who I am, and I got to where I am because of what I've done, not because of my gender, not because of my background. And I think that's the one thing all of us can change. And we start catching it, and it's every single day. You see it, and that's an important thing. And another thing I love is two good friends of mine. They've started a company called Choir, and what they try to do is they try to create a standard in the fintech and financial services conference circuit that implore organizers to include more diversity, not just, having a women in tech and check the box, yep, we took care of it, but actively including women's voices, diverse voices into their keynote, right? I remember a few years ago, CES, that was a big controversy because there was no women in the keynote stage. It was all men. Not because there are no amazing female CEO there, it's because people are very comfortable with reaching back into that same black book, the exact same little black book that have this exact same list of names every single time. And we all know what happened when you do not have the exposure on stage. You are limited in your opportunity to get your voice heard, and then you're limited in the opportunities to do other things. So let's change it. We can change it, right? That's not hard. It's intentional.
I love that. Let's change it. Like, come on, let's just do it. I mean, and you're right. You're right. And I think both of you, between not going back to that same network, right, to find the talent and expanding your reach. I have a great friend who actually is the best recruiter I've ever worked with, which is how we became to know each other. And she was sending me through resumes for different positions, and I was like, no, the background doesn't look quite right. Like, I don't know that they know how to do this. And one of the things that she taught me that I always try and look at when, sourcing candidates now is that not everyone has the same opportunities and experiences. And just because they might have not taken this linear path that you would expect to, for this position, doesn't mean that they're not qualified. There's actually so much more that they might potentially bring that isn't super obvious on their resume or on their profile. So ever since we had that conversation a few years ago, I've tried to be very deliberate in identifying what are some other characteristics to look for that are equally relevant and important for this role, which has led to some great hires that I might not have given a second look at. Right.
That
right.
is
And the whole notion of gender bias, now, particularly at the lower levels, again, I don't want to call out any brands, but when resumes are getting submitted and there's AI that's sorting through it. So they're looking exactly for that sequential. So that's how the algorithms are being built so that different resumes get kicked over to the hiring managers. There is a whole body of work going on, and I really applaud it around the gender bias from that perspective and not embed, and this is what we do. So how do you not embed the bias that we have in the code that we're writing? Because then it's just going to perpetuate itself. I was joking that there, job descriptions, there's whole websites out there. And again, that look for gender bias in job ads. So I had a job ad that was open. I'm like, oh, this is going to be fun. This is something that I care about. And it was funny. I put my one job description through and it showed me all these things. I'm like, holy cow. Okay. Yeah, I guess I could phrase that differently. So it was just really, really interesting and eye-opening too, frankly.
So on the topic of recruiting and hiring for skills, Ashley, I have to recommend this book by Nadia Edwards. Dashti, she's from the UK and she's a recruiter. And her book just published last week. It's called Walking the Talk for Real Change. And in there, it are stories from women in our ecosystem, stories of people who have overcome things. And those are, stories that we need to talk more often is, there are a lot of amazing women doing amazing things in the workplace, in financial services and beyond. And she wrote it from the background of a recruiter. And I do hope that, anyone who will be hiring and looking for people think beyond what you typically think people will fit into the role that you're hiring for. Look at the person as a person as the potential of what they can bring in rather than your preconceived notion of what they need to be.
I love that. So you said it's called Walking the Talk for Real Change by Nadia Edwards.
Nadia
right?
Edwards Ashty.
Okay.
Yeah. She
Okay.
is
Yeah.
amazing. So sorry.
We'll have to add that to the chat comments later on for people who are watching afterwards so that they can get access to that. Okay. So final question. I'm curious to know if there's been any standout person or people in your career that you feel have helped you become what you are today. And I don't even just mean like get to where you are, but kind of, help mold who you are and kind of the way that you look at things, man or woman.
Theo, you go first on that one.
Okay. I actually talked a little bit about this last week with Microsoft, and they published a blog about my little journey. And in there, I talked about a person. He was my boss in one of the very, very first jobs I had right when I moved to DC. And at that time, our company was going through some restructuring. And later, it was known to me that they were looking to cut people from our group, and they were planning to cut me because, I was the most junior. And he actually made it to a point. I went to the CEO and told him, don't cut Theo because she has the least experience, so it will be harder for her to find something else. If you want to cut someone, cut me. In the end, they kept us both. But what was amazing with that experience, and I later told him that I loved him to death, is he showed what being a leader is, what being a manager is. He didn't have to do that, right? I mean, tons of people wouldn't do that. But and he actually had a family, he had children, and I felt badly for it. But it's about showing that if you are a leader, you take care of the people in your team. You show them how being a true empathetic person is. And that was the one thing that just stuck to me. It's, being a leader is not just, checking the box and making sure you did X and Y and Z and meet your targets and whatever role that you're in. It's about giving them the opportunity, let them shine, and lift them up.
Absolutely. That's
Love
fabulous.
That.
Yeah. Similarly, I think that some of the most challenging managers that I've had have been the ones that have given me the greatest experience, men and women. And I do think sometimes the women got a bad rap. And Lord knows I felt that at times myself, because it's, supporting women doesn't always, or hell, supporting anybody doesn't mean always being nice is the wrong word. That's not what I'm constructive. We should all be open to constructive feedback. And I think as managers, that is our role, frankly. Okay. And, always professional. But if as a manager, your job is to make sure that whatever the task at hand gets done well, and it's meeting the company's goals and even, beating the goals. If that's not happening, you need to course correct. And I think sometimes that kind of constructive criticism or feedback, frankly, is seen as not supportive. And, that's just not going to do well for anybody, because we all, as a kid, if you're an athlete, you fall down, you get hurt, you learn from that, you get up, you don't want to do that again. Okay. You have similar experiences in your corporate world, hopefully ones that don't hurt you physically. That's a whole another issue, but you need to learn from it. And so, the managers that have pushed me the most, again, male and female, the one, particularly as a first-time CMO, the CEO that took a risk on me there. Okay. Huge shout out to, what he did to support me, as well as the board that was above it. Now, I spent hours interviewing with them and talking through different scenarios. But, that really made a difference in where I am.
I'm right there with you, Kathleen. I think the managers that have challenged me the most, and also been challenging as people sometimes, have been the ones that I was like, okay, this is how it's going to be. Like, so now I'm the person who's like, yes, give me feedback. Like,
Right.
just like I ask for it preemptively. Even today, I was meeting with our CEO, Tim, about a few things we have going on. I was like, okay, I like, just give me all of the feedback. I'll do with it what I will, but it's
Right.
good to have it, kind of that honest, unfiltered.
If I don't know about it, I can't change it.
Exactly. And I think for me, it's been a combination of getting that very direct feedback, but then also having mentors who saw something that in me that I didn't see in myself, right? That maybe I wasn't confident that I could do. And I think for me, one of those people has definitely been Anne Hanley, who is, the first chief content officer in existence, runs her own conference, is a badass, but has taken an interest in helping me find my voice and grow and learn and offer support. And I'm super appreciative for again, those that have just been supportive, but those that have also pushed, and the people at the intersection who do both, right? I think it's important to have all different types of people that help shape you, for sure. Well, I know we're just at about time. Any final bits of advice or parting thoughts before we wrap up that you want to share? We've had tons of comments in the chat, so everyone's really loving all of the expertise that you're sharing, but would love to know if there's any kind of final things you want the audience to know.
Go ahead, Theo.
It takes a village. I think
Yes.
that's all we can say. It takes a village. It takes men, women, all genders, people from all backgrounds, everywhere corner of the earth. Because guess what? We need all of us to work together to get to where we need to be. So
Yeah, I think you've just got, as a senior leader, as any senior leader in an organization, it's incumbent on you, it's your fiduciary responsibility to look at the entirety of the spectrum when you're bringing people into your organization. If you see just one group being represented, you're not, in my opinion, doing the right thing, because there's clearly so many other skill sets that you're not taking into consideration, or that frankly you're not taking advantage of, that are available. So that's always my challenge to folks, is look at your teams and really challenge yourself and your hiring managers around what they're doing there.
Love it.
So don't normalize having, okay, well, at least we have one woman. Don't normalize that. That's not enough. Okay, it's not enough. So.
I love it. I think that was great parting advice from both of you. So it takes a village. Don't normalize things. If you see something, do something about it, right? Absolutely. Be the change. Okay, well, I just thank you both so much for taking the time today. This was a really fun conversation. I've learned a lot about both of you. I now have at least two new books to read. So thank you for the recommendations. And I think, seeing kind of your experiences and how you're able to help lift up other women's voices in the industry is so incredibly important. So I thank everyone for tuning in, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.